Before we begin our story, imagine a vast land that armies have tried to conquer for more than 2,000 years. A land surrounded by mountains that rise like ancient walls. A land where deserts stretch so far that entire armies once disappeared within them. A land where empires have marched in with confidence, believing victory would be easy, only to discover that the land itself seemed to resist them. This is the story of Iran. For centuries, some of the most powerful forces in history have faced this land. The armies of mighty empires marched east from the Mediterranean. Nomadic conquerors thundered down from the steppes. Superpowers of the modern world watched it carefully, calculating risks and possibilities. Many believed they could bend this country to their will. But again and again, history produced a different result. Some invaders won battles but never truly controlled the land. Some occupied cities but struggled to rule the people. Others simply realized that the cost of conquering Iran would be far greater than anyone expected. There is something unusual about this country. It is not the largest nation on Earth. It is not the richest, and its military, at least on paper, is not the strongest. Yet military strategists, historians, and political leaders often speak about Iran with a certain caution. Not because it is unbeatable in every sense, but because defeating it has never been simple. To understand why, we must travel back in time. We must walk across the high plateaus where ancient kingdoms first rose. We must pass through narrow mountain passes where invading armies once struggled to move. We must listen to stories of emperors, generals, revolutionaries, and ordinary people who lived through wars that shaped this land. Because Iran is not just a modern nation. It is the descendant of one of the oldest continuous civilizations on Earth. For thousands of years, this region has produced empires, survived invasions, rebuilt after disasters, and preserved a powerful cultural identity that refused to disappear. Time and time again, Iran has been attacked, pressured, surrounded, and challenged. And time again, it endured. Some historians say the secret lies in geography. Others believe it lies in culture. Some point to history itself, a long memory of survival that shaped how the country prepares for conflict. But the real answer is more complicated. Iran is difficult to defeat because of many forces working together. The land itself, the legacy of ancient empires, the resilience of its people, and a strategic mindset forged by centuries of conflict. Tonight we are going to explore that story slowly and carefully. We will travel through ancient kingdoms and forgotten battlefields. We will witness the rise and fall of empires. We will see how geography, culture, and history combined to create one of the most resilient nations in the world. By the end of this journey, you may begin to understand why Iran has become one of the most challenging countries in history to conquer, and why, for thousands of years, the same question keeps appearing in the minds of generals and rulers who look toward this ancient land. What makes Iran so difficult to defeat?
Long before modern borders were drawn on maps, long before the idea of nations existed in the form we know today, there was a vast region stretching across the heart of Western Asia that travelers described as both beautiful and unforgiving. This was the Iranian plateau. It is a land that does not easily reveal itself to outsiders. From a distance, it appears harsh and silent. Mountains rise abruptly from the earth. Dry winds move across plains that seem endless. In many places, the land is rocky, dry, and difficult to cross. But within this landscape lies one of the most historically resilient civilizations in human history. To understand why Iran has been so difficult to defeat, we must begin with the land itself. Geography is often the silent architect of history. It determines where cities rise, where trade routes pass, and where armies struggle to move. In the case of Iran, geography created a natural fortress long before humans built their first walls. The Iranian plateau sits high above the surrounding regions. In many places, the land rises more than 1,000 meters above sea level. The terrain is uneven, rugged, and full of natural barriers that break up the landscape. To the west stand the towering ridges of the Zagros Mountains. These mountains stretch for more than 1,500 kilometers, forming a massive wall between the Iranian plateau and the plains of Mesopotamia. For an invading army approaching from the west, these mountains have always been the first challenge. Narrow passes twist through steep valleys. Weather changes quickly. Supply lines become long and fragile. Armies that once marched confidently across open land suddenly find themselves moving slowly through difficult terrain. Even today, military strategists understand how dangerous mountain warfare can be. To the north rises another powerful barrier, the Alborz Mountains. These mountains stand between the Iranian plateau and the Caspian region. Their peaks are tall and sharp, and among them rises one of the highest mountains in the entire Middle East, Mount Damavand. For ancient armies, these mountains were more than obstacles. They were defensive shields that protected the heart of the plateau. And then there are the deserts. In the center of Iran lies one of the most inhospitable landscapes on Earth, the vast salt desert known as Dasht-e-Kavir. Not far from it lies another extreme environment, the scorching desert of Dasht-e-Lut, a place where some of the highest ground temperatures ever recorded on Earth have been measured. To cross these deserts without careful preparation is dangerous even today. For ancient armies, it could be deadly. Water sources are scarce. The ground can turn into thick salt marshes that trap animals and wagons. Heat drains the strength from soldiers who are not accustomed to such conditions. Because of these deserts, invading forces could not simply march straight across the land. They were forced to move along narrow corridors where water and food could be found. These corridors became strategic choke points that defenders could control. For thousands of years, this geography shaped the history of the region. But the land alone does not explain Iran's resilience. After all, mountains and deserts exist in many parts of the world. What made Iran different was how its people adapted to this environment. Life on the Iranian plateau required patience and endurance. Farmers learned how to build irrigation systems that carried water across dry ground. Engineers created underground channels called qanats that allowed communities to survive in areas where rainfall was scarce. These systems required careful planning and cooperation. Entire communities depended on them. Over time, this way of life created societies that valued organization, resilience, and long-term thinking. Trade routes also played an important role. The Iranian plateau sat between some of the most important regions of the ancient world. To the west lay the rich river valleys of Mesopotamia. To the east stretched the lands of Central Asia and the distant routes that would later become part of the Silk Road. To the south lay the waters of the Persian Gulf and connections to India and the Arabian Peninsula. Merchants, travelers, and armies all passed through this crossroads. Cities rose along these routes, becoming centers of culture, commerce, and administration. Over generations, these cities grew stronger and more organized. Among the earliest powerful civilizations of the plateau were the people known as the Persians. Their homeland lay in the southwestern part of the plateau, in a region that ancient sources called Persis. From this region emerged one of the most remarkable empires in human history, the Achaemenid Empire. When this empire began to rise in the 6th century before the Common Era, the world had already seen many powerful kingdoms. Yet the Persians built something different. They created an empire that stretched from the Mediterranean Sea to the Indus River, linking dozens of cultures, languages, and landscapes under a single system of administration. Its founder, Cyrus the Great, is remembered not only as a conqueror, but also as a ruler who understood the complexity of governing vast lands. Instead of trying to erase local cultures, he allowed many traditions and religions to continue. Local leaders were often kept in positions of authority as long as they remained loyal to the empire. This approach created stability across an enormous territory. The empire developed roads that connected distant cities. Messengers could travel quickly across the land using relay stations. Administrators recorded taxes, trade, and resources with remarkable precision for the time. But perhaps more important than its size was the mentality it created. For the people of the Iranian plateau, the rise of the Achaemenid Empire proved something important. They had learned not only how to survive in a difficult land, but also how to organize and defend a vast territory. This tradition of statecraft would echo through centuries of history. Empires rose and fell across the region, but the idea of a powerful Persian state continued to reappear in new forms. Even when foreign powers invaded, the memory of past greatness remained strong. And that memory would play a powerful role in shaping the future. Throughout history, many conquerors believed that capturing the major cities of Iran would be enough to control the region. Yet they often discovered something unexpected. The cities were only part of the story. Beyond them lay mountains filled with small communities, deserts that slowed movement, and a population accustomed to adapting during times of crisis. In difficult moments, people moved, reorganized, and resisted in ways that made complete control extremely difficult. This pattern would repeat again and again. Invaders might win impressive victories in battle. They might capture capitals and declare triumph, but holding the land over the long term was another matter entirely. The geography remained the same. The culture remained strong. And the memory of independence remained alive. Over centuries, the Iranian plateau became known as a place where great powers could enter, but rarely dominate easily. It was a land that absorbed shocks and then slowly rebuilt itself. And this was only the beginning of the story, because soon the ancient Persian world would face some of the most powerful empires the Mediterranean had ever produced. Armies from the west would begin to march toward the Iranian plateau. They came with discipline, ambition, and confidence. They believed they were marching toward victory. But they were about to discover that conquering this land was far more complicated than they imagined. In the next chapter of our journey, we will see how the legacy of Persia continued through powerful empires that faced rivals as formidable as the great powers of Rome. And in those struggles, the foundations of Iran's enduring resilience would grow even stronger. The story of Iran's resilience did not end with the first great Persian Empire. In many ways, it was only beginning. Across the centuries that followed, the Iranian plateau would experience the rise and fall of powerful states. Some would expand into vast empires. Others would collapse under the pressure of war, rebellion, or internal struggle. Yet something remarkable continued to happen. Even when empires disappeared, the political and cultural traditions of the region refused to vanish. New dynasties rose from the same land, often rebuilding power with surprising speed. This pattern repeated so many times that historians began to notice it. Iranian civilization seemed to possess an unusual ability to recover. To understand why this mattered so much, we must return to the time when the first great Persian Empire dominated the ancient world. The Achaemenid Empire ruled an enormous territory that stretched across 3 continents. It included Egypt, Mesopotamia, Anatolia, and lands reaching deep into Central Asia. At its height, it was one of the largest empires the world had ever seen. Its capital cities, such as Persepolis and Susa, became centers of administration and ceremony, where representatives from many different cultures gathered. Delegations from distant provinces traveled long roads to bring tribute. Soldiers from dozens of regions served within the imperial army. This diversity created both strength and vulnerability. A vast empire brings enormous resources, but it also requires constant attention to maintain unity. Roads must be protected, governors must remain loyal, borders must be defended. For many years, the Achaemenid rulers managed this balance with remarkable skill. But eventually, a challenger appeared from the west. In the 4th century before the Common Era, a young king from Macedonia launched one of the most ambitious military campaigns in ancient history. His name was Alexander the Great. His army moved quickly across the eastern Mediterranean, defeating several powerful kingdoms along the way. After securing control of the Greek world and Egypt, he turned his attention toward the Persian Empire. What followed was a series of dramatic battles between two great powers. One of the most famous occurred during the Battle of Gaugamela. There, the Persian king Darius III commanded a massive army drawn from across the empire. Alexander's force was smaller but highly disciplined and led by a commander known for bold strategy. The battle ended in defeat for the Persians. Afterward, Alexander marched deeper into the empire. Cities fell. Royal palaces were captured. Eventually, even the ceremonial capital of Persepolis was taken. From the outside, it appeared that one of the greatest empires in history had been completely destroyed. Yet the deeper story was more complicated. Alexander's conquest was impressive, but ruling the Iranian plateau proved far more difficult than defeating its armies. The region was vast. Communication across the mountains and deserts was slow. Local leaders still held influence in many areas, and the administrative systems created by the Persians were deeply rooted. Alexander himself recognized this reality. Rather than completely dismantling Persian institutions, he began adopting elements of them. Persian officials remained in administrative roles. Local customs continued to shape daily life in many regions. Even the conqueror who defeated the empire found himself relying on the systems it had built. When Alexander died unexpectedly in 323 BCE, his enormous empire quickly fragmented. Generals fought each other for control of the territories he had conquered. In the lands of Iran, the region eventually fell under the rule of the Seleucid Empire, a Greek-founded dynasty that attempted to maintain authority over much of the former Persian realm. But once again, the geography and culture of the Iranian plateau began to shape events. The Seleucid rulers controlled many cities, but their hold over the eastern regions was often fragile. Distance made it difficult to project power. Local populations retained their traditions and identities. Gradually, resistance grew. From the northeastern frontiers of the plateau emerged a new power, the Parthian Empire. The Parthians began as a group of Iranian nomadic warriors who moved into the region during a time of political instability. Their strength lay in mobility and cavalry warfare. Unlike the heavy infantry armies common in the Mediterranean world, Parthian forces relied on fast horse archers who could strike quickly and retreat before their enemies could respond. Their tactics were perfectly suited to the wide plains and rugged terrain of Iran. Over time, the Parthians expanded their control across the plateau and beyond. They eventually replaced the Seleucid rulers and created a new Iranian empire. This empire would become famous for one reason in particular. It stood face to face with one of the most powerful states of the ancient world. To the west, a new superpower was rising: the Roman Empire. The Romans had conquered vast territories around the Mediterranean Sea. Their legions were disciplined, organized, and supported by impressive engineering and logistics. Roman generals believed that with enough determination, they could defeat almost any opponent. But when Roman armies began pushing eastward, they encountered a different kind of challenge. In 53 BCE, a Roman commander named Marcus Licinius Crassus led a massive expedition into Parthian territory. Crassus was one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in Rome, and he hoped to win glory through conquest. His army marched into the region expecting a decisive victory. Instead, they encountered the Parthian cavalry near the city of Carrhae. What followed became one of the most famous defeats in Roman military history: the Battle of Carrhae. Roman soldiers were trained for close combat. Their strength lay in disciplined formations and heavy armor. The Parthians fought differently. Horse archers surrounded the Roman army, firing arrows from a distance while remaining constantly in motion. Whenever the Romans attempted to charge, the Parthians simply rode away, continuing to attack from afar. The desert heat added to the Roman difficulties. Water supplies ran low. Fatigue spread through the ranks. The battle turned into a disaster for Rome. Crassus himself was killed, and thousands of Roman soldiers were captured. For the Romans, the defeat was shocking. It demonstrated that even the famous Roman legions could struggle against opponents who understood the terrain and used tactics suited to it. For the Parthians, the victory confirmed their position as a major power in the region. For centuries afterward, the Roman and Parthian empires remained rivals. They fought wars, negotiated treaties, and competed for influence across the Middle East. Yet neither side was able to fully conquer the other. The mountains, deserts, and vast distances of the Iranian plateau made deep invasions extremely difficult. Armies could win battles near the borders, but pushing further into the interior often proved too costly. Over time, the Parthian Empire itself would face internal struggles. Dynastic conflicts weakened central authority, and regional leaders sometimes acted independently. Eventually, another Iranian dynasty rose to challenge them. This new power was the Sasanian Empire. The Sasanians would build one of the most formidable states in ancient history. They reorganized the military, strengthened central administration, and revived many elements of Persian imperial identity. Under their rule, the rivalry with Rome would reach new levels of intensity. Massive wars would erupt across the Middle East, involving some of the largest armies of the ancient world. And through these conflicts, the Iranian plateau would once again prove to be a land where conquest was far more difficult than it first appeared. In the next part of our story, we will watch as the Sasanian Empire rises to power and confronts the Roman world in a struggle that lasts for centuries. It will be a contest between two giants of the ancient world, and once again, the land of Iran will show why it has always been one of the hardest places on earth for any empire to truly defeat. By the 3rd century of the Common Era, the balance of power in the Middle East began to shift once again. The Parthian Empire, which had ruled the Iranian plateau for nearly 500 years, was weakening. Internal rivalries between noble families made it harder for the central government to maintain control. Regional leaders grew more independent, and the authority of the Parthian kings slowly eroded. Throughout history, moments like this often invite invasion. When a powerful state begins to weaken, neighboring empires usually see opportunity. Borders are tested. Armies prepare for expansion. But what happened in Iran during this time followed a pattern that would repeat many times across the centuries. Instead of foreign powers conquering the region, a new Iranian dynasty rose from within. In the southwestern lands of the plateau, a local ruler named Ardashir I began building a new base of power. He came from a region historically associated with the earliest Persian kingdoms, the same cultural heartland that had produced the rulers of the Achaemenid Empire many centuries earlier. Ardashir was ambitious and determined. Over time, he gathered supporters and challenged the declining Parthian rulers. The conflict eventually led to a decisive confrontation in the year 224 CE. In that battle, Ardashir defeated the last Parthian king and declared the beginning of a new imperial dynasty. This new state became known as the Sasanian Empire. The rise of the Sasanians marked one of the most important turning points in Iranian history. Unlike the Parthians, whose power was shared among many noble families, the Sasanian rulers aimed to create a stronger and more centralized state. They reorganized the administration, strengthened the authority of the monarchy, and built a more structured military. At the same time, they revived many cultural traditions that connected their rule to the ancient Persian past. Royal ceremonies, architecture, and art all reflected a sense of continuity with earlier empires. The memory of ancient Persia was not forgotten. Instead, it was carefully preserved and celebrated. This cultural confidence helped unify the population of the Iranian plateau under a renewed sense of identity. But the Sasanian rulers faced an enormous challenge almost immediately after establishing their empire. To the west stood one of the most powerful states in the world, the Roman Empire. For centuries, Rome had expanded across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Its armies were famous for their discipline, engineering skill, and relentless organization. By the time the Sasanian Empire appeared, Rome already controlled many territories that had once been influenced by Persian power. Conflict between these two empires was almost inevitable. The frontier between them stretched across the region of Mesopotamia, a land of fertile rivers, ancient cities, and strategic trade routes. Control of this area meant wealth, influence, and security. And so the long rivalry between Rome and Persia began. One of the most dramatic moments in this struggle occurred during the reign of the Sasanian king Shapur I. Shapur was an energetic and ambitious ruler who believed the new empire should prove its strength quickly. He launched a series of campaigns against Roman territory, pushing deep into lands that had been under Roman control for generations. Roman armies marched east to stop him. Battles erupted across the frontier. Cities changed hands. Fortresses were besieged. The conflict became one of the defining struggles of the 3rd century. Then, in the year 260 CE, something extraordinary happened. The Roman emperor himself, Valerian, personally led a large army into the region to confront the Persians. Roman emperors often commanded troops, but rarely did they place themselves in such direct danger. During the campaign, Valerian's forces encountered the Sasanian army near the city of Edessa. The result was shocking. In the Battle of Edessa, the Roman army was defeated, and the emperor Valerian was captured alive. For Rome, this was an unprecedented humiliation. Never before had a Roman emperor been taken prisoner by a foreign enemy. For the Sasanian Empire, it was a powerful demonstration of strength. Images carved into rock reliefs across Iran would later depict Shapur I receiving the submission of the Roman emperor. These carvings still exist today, silent reminders of the moment when Persia triumphed over one of the greatest empires of antiquity. Yet the wars between Rome and Persia did not end with this victory. They continued for centuries. Sometimes the Romans gained the advantage. At other times, the Persians pushed deep into Roman territory. Both sides built powerful fortifications along the frontier. Both developed complex diplomatic strategies involving alliances with smaller states. And both learned an important lesson. Completely conquering the Iranian plateau was extraordinarily difficult. Roman armies occasionally captured cities near the western edges of Persian territory, but pushing deeper into the plateau required long supply lines and constant movement through unfamiliar terrain. The further an invading army traveled, the harder it became to maintain momentum. Mountains slowed the movement of troops. Harsh winters disrupted campaigns. Local resistance could appear unexpectedly. Meanwhile, Persian armies often relied on mobility and knowledge of the landscape to counterattack at the right moment. In many ways, the rivalry between Rome and Persia became a balance of power. Neither empire could fully eliminate the other. Instead, they existed as two giants facing each other across the Middle East, each powerful enough to prevent the other from dominating the entire region. Over time, the Roman Empire itself began to change. The western half of the empire weakened under pressure from migrations, economic challenges, and internal instability. Eventually, it collapsed in the 5th century. But the eastern half survived. This eastern continuation of Rome became known as the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantine rulers inherited Rome's long rivalry with Persia, and the wars continued. Some of these conflicts became incredibly destructive. Entire regions were devastated by repeated campaigns. Yet, even during these difficult times, the Iranian plateau remained resilient. Cities were rebuilt, trade resumed, administrative systems continued to function. The Sasanian Empire adapted to changing circumstances, maintaining its position as a major power for centuries. But history rarely remains stable forever. In the early 7th century, the long struggle between Persia and the Byzantine Empire reached a dramatic climax. Massive armies marched across the Middle East. Fortresses fell. Ancient cities were captured and recaptured. At one point, Persian forces advanced as far as Egypt and the eastern Mediterranean, threatening the very heart of Byzantine power. For a brief moment, it appeared that Persia might finally dominate the region completely. Yet these victories came at a heavy cost. Years of war exhausted both empires. Economies weakened. Populations suffered. And while the two ancient rivals fought each other with increasing intensity, a new force was rising quietly in the deserts to the south. A movement that would soon reshape the entire Middle East. Within a few decades, the Sasanian Empire would face a challenge unlike any it had encountered before. A challenge that would transform the history of Iran and the surrounding world. And yet, even when this ancient empire finally fell, the deeper story of Iranian resilience would not end. Because while dynasties may disappear, civilizations can endure. In the next part of our journey, we will see how one of the most dramatic waves of conquest in human history swept across the Middle East. Empires that had dominated the region for centuries suddenly collapsed. But the Iranian world, once again, would prove far more difficult to erase than anyone expected. By the early 7th century, the Middle East had already endured centuries of rivalry between two powerful empires. On one side stood the Sasanian Empire, the latest successor to the long tradition of Persian imperial power. On the other stood the Byzantine Empire, the eastern continuation of Rome. For generations, these two states had fought for control of the lands between them. Their armies clashed across Mesopotamia, Syria, and Anatolia. Cities were fortified, destroyed, and rebuilt again and again. By the beginning of the 7th century, the conflict reached one of its most intense phases. The Sasanian ruler, Khosrow II, launched a massive campaign against the Byzantine world. His armies advanced with surprising speed, capturing key cities and pushing deep into territories that had long been under Byzantine control. At different moments during this war, Persian forces controlled Syria, Egypt, and large parts of Anatolia. They even approached the outskirts of Constantinople, the powerful Byzantine capital. From the perspective of many observers at the time, it appeared that the balance of power in the region had shifted dramatically. Persia seemed close to achieving a level of dominance that earlier rulers had only dreamed of. But the war between the two empires was incredibly destructive. Years of continuous fighting drained resources on both sides. Armies marched across the same lands again and again, leaving behind damaged infrastructure and exhausted populations. Eventually, The Byzantine Emperor Heraclius launched a daring counteroffensive. Instead of defending the frontier, he led his forces directly into Persian territory. Byzantine troops moved through the mountains of the Caucasus and into the northern regions of the Sasanian Empire. The campaign shocked Persian leadership. Battles followed, and the long war finally reached a turning point. After years of brutal conflict, the Sasanian political system began to weaken. Internal struggles erupted among the nobility. Leadership became unstable. In a short period of time, several rulers took the throne and lost it again. The empire that had once challenged Rome as an equal now faced deep internal turmoil. And it was during this moment of exhaustion and instability that a new force emerged from the Arabian Peninsula. This force was driven by the rapid expansion of the early Islamic State following the life of Muhammad. Within a few years after his death, armies inspired by a new religious and political movement began moving beyond Arabia. Their expansion was swift and surprising. Many of the regions they entered had already been weakened by the long wars between Persia and Byzantium. Local populations were tired of constant conflict and heavy taxation. In several places, resistance collapsed more quickly than expected. By the 630s, Arab armies began advancing into territories controlled by the Sasanian Empire. One of the most decisive moments in this struggle occurred during the Battle of Al-Qadisiyah. There, Sasanian forces attempted to stop the advancing armies before they could penetrate deeper into the heart of the empire. The battle was fierce and chaotic. For the Persians, it was a desperate effort to protect centuries of imperial tradition. For their opponents, it was part of a rapidly expanding movement that was reshaping the Middle East. When the battle ended, the Sasanian army had suffered a devastating defeat. The road toward the interior of the empire was now open. Arab forces advanced toward the great cities of Mesopotamia, including the imperial capital at Ctesiphon. When the city fell, it marked the symbolic collapse of Sasanian imperial authority. Yet, even at this dramatic moment, the conquest of Iran was far from complete. The Iranian plateau is not a single open plain, where one decisive battle determines the fate of the entire region. Instead, it is a vast and complicated landscape filled with mountains, valleys, deserts, and isolated strongholds. After the fall of the capital, resistance continued in many areas. Local leaders organized defenses. Remaining Sasanian forces attempted to regroup. Battles occurred across multiple regions as the struggle continued. The final Sasanian ruler, Yazdegerd III, fled eastward in an attempt to rally support and rebuild an army. For several years he moved from city to city, seeking allies and trying to restore the empire. But the political structure that had once supported the Sasanian state was already breaking apart. Without a stable central government, coordinated resistance became increasingly difficult. Eventually, the last Sasanian ruler was killed while in exile. With his death, the formal existence of the Sasanian Empire came to an end. At first glance, this might appear to be the moment when Persia was finally defeated. After centuries of imperial power, the political structure that had ruled the Iranian plateau had collapsed. But history would soon reveal something remarkable. The conquest of the empire did not erase Persian civilization. Instead, Persian culture began to reshape the very system that had conquered it. Under the expanding Islamic world, Iran gradually became one of the most important cultural centers of the new civilization. The Persian language survived and evolved. Literature flourished. Scholars, poets, scientists, and administrators from Iranian lands played major roles in shaping intellectual life across the Middle East. Even within the political structures of later Islamic empires, Persian administrative traditions remained influential. In many cases, rulers adopted systems of governance that had been refined during earlier Persian dynasties. Over time, Persian culture spread far beyond the Iranian plateau. It influenced regions stretching from Central Asia to the Indian subcontinent. Poetry, architecture, philosophy, and political thought carried the legacy of ancient Persia into entirely new eras. This transformation demonstrated an important truth about the resilience of Iran. Empires can fall, dynasties can disappear, but civilizations often survive in deeper ways. For the people of the Iranian plateau, identity was not defined only by a single government. It was rooted in language, culture, memory, and the shared experience of living in a land shaped by difficult geography and long history. These deeper foundations allowed Iranian society to endure even after the fall of its greatest empire. And in the centuries that followed, new dynasties would eventually rise again within the same lands. Once more, the Iranian plateau would become the center of powerful states. But before that happened, another dramatic chapter of world history would unfold. From the distant grasslands of Central Asia, a wave of conquerors would sweep across the continent with unprecedented speed. Cities would burn, empires would collapse, and much of the known world would tremble before the arrival of one of the most feared forces in human history: the Mongols. In the next part of our journey, we will see how the Iranian plateau faced one of the most destructive invasions ever recorded. And once again, we will discover why this land has an extraordinary ability to endure even the most devastating storms of history. By the early 7th century, the Middle East had already endured centuries of rivalry between two powerful empires. On one side stood the Sasanian Empire, the latest successor to the long tradition of Persian imperial power. On the other stood the Byzantine Empire, the eastern continuation of Rome. For generations, these two states had fought for control of the lands between them. Their armies clashed across Mesopotamia, Syria, and Anatolia. Cities were fortified, destroyed, and rebuilt again and again. By the beginning of the 7th century, the conflict reached one of its most intense phases. The Sasanian ruler, Khosrow II, launched a massive campaign against the Byzantine world. His armies advanced with surprising speed, capturing key cities and pushing deep into territories that had long been under Byzantine control. At different moments during this war, Persian forces controlled Syria, Egypt, and large parts of Anatolia. They even approached the outskirts of Constantinople, the powerful Byzantine capital. From the perspective of many observers at the time, it appeared that the balance of power in the region had shifted dramatically. Persia seemed close to achieving a level of dominance that earlier rulers had only dreamed of. But the war between the two empires was incredibly destructive. Years of continuous fighting drained resources on both sides. Armies marched across the same lands again and again, leaving behind damaged infrastructure and exhausted populations. Eventually, the Byzantine Emperor Heraclius launched a daring counteroffensive. Instead of defending the frontier, he led his forces directly into Persian territory. Byzantine troops moved through the mountains of the Caucasus and into the northern regions of the Sasanian Empire. The campaign shocked Persian leadership. Battles followed, and the long war finally reached a turning point. After years of brutal conflict, the Sasanian political system began to weaken. Internal struggles erupted among the nobility. Leadership became unstable. In a short period of time, several rulers took the throne and lost it again. The empire that had once challenged Rome as an equal now faced deep internal turmoil. And it was during this moment of exhaustion and instability that a new force emerged from the Arabian Peninsula. This force was driven by the rapid expansion of the early Islamic State following the life of Muhammad. Within a few years after his death, armies inspired by a new religious and political movement began moving beyond Arabia. Their expansion was swift and surprising. Many of the regions they entered had already been weakened by the long wars between Persia and Byzantium. Local populations were tired of constant conflict and heavy taxation. In several places, resistance collapsed more quickly than expected. By the 630s, Arab armies began advancing into territories controlled by the Sasanian Empire. One of the most decisive moments in this struggle occurred during the Battle of Al-Qadisiyah. There, Sasanian forces attempted to stop the advancing armies before they could penetrate deeper into the heart of the empire. The battle was fierce and chaotic. For the Persians, it was a desperate effort to protect centuries of imperial tradition. For their opponents, it was part of a rapidly expanding movement that was reshaping the Middle East. When the battle ended, the Sasanian army had suffered a devastating defeat. The road toward the interior of the empire was now open. Arab forces advanced toward the great cities of Mesopotamia, including the imperial capital at Ctesiphon. When the city fell, it marked the symbolic collapse of Sasanian imperial authority. Yet, even at this dramatic moment, the conquest of Iran was far from complete. The Iranian plateau is not a single open plain, where one decisive battle determines the fate of the entire region. Instead, it is a vast and complicated landscape filled with mountains, valleys, deserts, and isolated strongholds. After the fall of the capital, resistance continued in many areas. Local leaders organized defenses. Remaining Sasanian forces attempted to regroup. Battles occurred across multiple regions as the struggle continued. The final Sasanian ruler, Yazdegerd III, fled eastward in an attempt to rally support and rebuild an army. For several years he moved from city to city, seeking allies and trying to restore the empire. But the political structure that had once supported the Sasanian state was already breaking apart. Without a stable central government, coordinated resistance became increasingly difficult. Eventually, the last Sasanian ruler was killed while in exile. With his death, the formal existence of the Sasanian Empire came to an end. At first glance, this might appear to be the moment when Persia was finally defeated. After centuries of imperial power, the political structure that had ruled the Iranian plateau had collapsed. But history would soon reveal something remarkable. The conquest of the empire did not erase Persian civilization. Instead, Persian culture began to reshape the very system that had conquered it. Under the expanding Islamic world, Iran gradually became one of the most important cultural centers of the new civilization. The Persian language survived and evolved. Literature flourished. Scholars, poets, scientists, and administrators from Iranian lands played major roles in shaping intellectual life across the Middle East. Even within the political structures of later Islamic empires, Persian administrative traditions remained influential. In many cases, rulers adopted systems of governance that had been refined during earlier Persian dynasties. Over time, Persian culture spread far beyond the Iranian plateau. It influenced regions stretching from Central Asia to the Indian subcontinent. Poetry, architecture, philosophy, and political thought carried the legacy of ancient Persia into entirely new eras. This transformation demonstrated an important truth about the resilience of Iran. Empires can fall, dynasties can disappear, but civilizations often survive in deeper ways. For the people of the Iranian plateau, identity was not defined only by a single government. It was rooted in language, culture, memory, and the shared experience of living in a land shaped by difficult geography and long history. These deeper foundations allowed Iranian society to endure even after the fall of its greatest empire. And in the centuries that followed, New dynasties would eventually rise again within the same lands. Once more, the Iranian plateau would become the center of powerful states. But before that happened, another dramatic chapter of world history would unfold. From the distant grasslands of Central Asia, a wave of conquerors would sweep across the continent with unprecedented speed. Cities would burn, empires would collapse, and much of the known world would tremble before the arrival of one of the most feared forces in human history: the Mongols. In the next part of our journey, we will see how the Iranian plateau faced one of the most destructive invasions ever recorded. And once again, we will discover why this land has an extraordinary ability to endure even the most devastating storms of history. By the beginning of the 16th century, the Iranian plateau had once again entered a period of transformation. The centuries following the Mongol invasions had left the region politically fragmented. Local dynasties ruled different territories, trade networks were gradually rebuilding, and cultural life continued to flourish across cities and towns. But despite this recovery, the Iranian world still lacked something it had possessed during earlier periods of its history: a unified state. For centuries, the plateau had been divided between competing powers, yet the memory of earlier empires remained strong in the cultural imagination of the region. Stories of ancient kings, heroic battles, and the grandeur of Persian civilization continued to circulate through poetry, literature, and oral tradition. In many ways, the idea of Iran as a unified realm had never completely disappeared. And then, in the early 1500s, a young leader emerged who would transform the political landscape of the entire region. His name was Shah Ismail I. Shah Ismail came from a religious and political movement that had gathered followers across parts of Iran and neighboring lands. Though still very young when he began his campaigns, he possessed remarkable determination and charisma. His supporters believed he had a special destiny. In 1501, after a series of rapid military victories, Shah Ismail captured the city of Tabriz. There, he declared himself ruler and founded a new dynasty known as the Safavid Empire. This moment marked the beginning of a new chapter in Iranian history. For the first time in centuries, a powerful central government began to reunify the Iranian plateau under a single authority. The Safavid rulers also made a decision that would shape the identity of Iran for generations. They established Shia Islam as the official religion of the state. At the time, much of the surrounding Islamic world followed different traditions within Islam. By adopting this religious identity, the Safavid state created a distinctive cultural and political character that separated it from many of its neighbors. Religion became an important element in the formation of a shared identity across the Safavid realm. Yet, the rise of the Safavid Empire also placed Iran directly between several powerful rivals. To the west stood one of the largest and most formidable states of the early modern era, the Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans controlled vast territories stretching across southeastern Europe, Anatolia, the Middle East, and North Africa. Their military forces were highly organized, and their empire possessed enormous economic and political resources. To the northeast, another powerful state was emerging, the Uzbek Khanate. These rival powers created a challenging strategic environment for the Safavid rulers. Iran was once again positioned between competing empires. Conflict soon followed. One of the most important early confrontations occurred during the Battle of Chaldiran in 1514. At this battle, the army of Shah Ismail faced the forces of the Ottoman Sultan Selim I. The Ottomans possessed powerful artillery and firearms, technologies that were beginning to transform warfare during this period. The Safavid army, though brave and determined, relied more heavily on traditional cavalry tactics. The battle ended in defeat for Shah Ismail. The Ottomans captured Tabriz temporarily, demonstrating the growing importance of gunpowder weapons in early modern warfare. Yet, even after this setback, the Safavid state survived, and this survival once again revealed something important about Iran's resilience. The Ottoman Empire was one of the most powerful military states of its time. Yet, even after defeating the Safavid army in a major battle, it could not fully conquer the Iranian plateau. Distance and geography played a crucial role. The further Ottoman forces advanced eastward, the more difficult their supply lines became. The Zagros mountain ranges created natural defensive barriers that slowed movement and complicated logistics. Meanwhile, the Safavid rulers reorganized their military and administration. They adapted to new forms of warfare, gradually incorporating firearms and artillery into their own forces. They strengthened their government institutions and reinforced control over the plateau. Over time, the Safavid capital moved to the magnificent city of Isfahan. Under rulers such as Shah Abbas I, the city transformed into one of the most beautiful urban centers of the early modern world. Grand squares, elegant mosques, bustling markets, and impressive bridges reflected both artistic creativity and political stability. Isfahan became a symbol of Safavid power. European travelers who visited the city during this period often wrote about its beauty and sophistication. Trade routes connected Iran to Europe, India, Central Asia, and China. Merchants exchanged silk, carpets, spices, metals, and textiles across long distances. The Safavid state carefully managed these networks, strengthening its economy and diplomatic relationships. Yet, despite these successes, the empire remained surrounded by powerful rivals. The Ottomans continued to challenge Safavid authority along the western frontier. Central Asian forces occasionally threatened the northeastern borders. At different moments, the empire faced internal struggles as well. But once again, the pattern of Iranian resilience appeared. When crises emerged, the state adapted. Military reforms were introduced. Alliances shifted. Regional leaders were brought into the political system. And throughout these changes, the geography of the plateau continued to provide strategic advantages. Mountains slowed invasions. Deserts limited rapid military movement. Large distances forced invading armies to stretch their resources across difficult terrain. These factors did not make Iran impossible to invade, but they made conquest extremely expensive and uncertain. For centuries, the Safavid Empire maintained its position between rival powers while preserving a distinctive Iranian identity. However, history rarely allows stability to last forever. By the early 18th century, the Safavid state began facing serious internal problems. Political corruption weakened central authority. Economic challenges created unrest in several regions. Provincial leaders sometimes acted independently from the royal court. These difficulties opened the door for new threats. Foreign invasions and internal revolts began to shake the empire. Eventually, the Safavid dynasty collapsed. Yet, once again, the fall of a ruling house did not erase the deeper structures of Iranian society. Local leaders, military commanders, and regional dynasties continued to compete for power across the plateau. And once again, from this period of chaos, a powerful figure would emerge who would reunite much of the country. He was a brilliant and ruthless military commander. His campaigns would restore Iranian independence after years of instability, and his victories would make him one of the most formidable conquerors of the 18th century. His name was Nader Shah. In the next part of our journey, we will see how this extraordinary leader rebuilt Iran's military power and led campaigns that shocked the surrounding world. And through his story, we will continue to uncover the deeper reasons why Iran has remained one of the most difficult lands in history for any empire to fully defeat. When the Safavid Empire collapsed in the early 18th century, the Iranian plateau once again entered a period of deep uncertainty. For centuries, the Safavid rulers had maintained a unified state that balanced powerful neighbors and managed the complex geography of the region. Their fall created a sudden vacuum of authority. Different factions struggled for control. Tribal leaders, provincial governors, and military commanders competed for influence across the land. At the same time, foreign powers watched carefully. Moments of internal weakness often invite outside intervention. Empires on Iran's borders understood that instability could present an opportunity to expand their influence. And for a brief moment, it seemed possible that Iran might finally lose its independence. But history once again took an unexpected turn. Out of the chaos emerged one of the most remarkable military leaders the region had ever seen. His name was Nader Shah. Nader Shah did not begin his life as a prince or noble ruler. He came from a relatively modest background in the northeastern regions of the Iranian plateau. As a young man, he experienced the hardships of a land caught between conflict and instability. These experiences shaped his character and sharpened his instincts as a fighter and leader. Over time, he gathered a small group of loyal followers and began building a military force. What made Nader Shah unusual was not only his courage, but his understanding of strategy. He recognized that Iran's survival depended on rebuilding a strong army that could adapt to the changing nature of warfare. The military forces he assembled combined traditional Persian cavalry with more modern firearms and artillery. Discipline and mobility became central elements of his campaigns. Step by step, he began restoring order across regions that had fallen into chaos. His early victories allowed him to gain influence within the remaining structures of government. Eventually, he became the leading military commander of the country. At the time, Iran faced a serious external threat. The Ottoman Empire and the Russian Empire had both taken advantage of Safavid weakness to seize territory along Iran's borders. Foreign troops occupied lands that had been part of the Iranian world for generations. Nader Shah made it clear that this situation would not continue. He reorganized his forces and launched campaigns to drive out foreign armies. Through a series of fast-moving military operations, he pushed back the invaders and restored control over large areas of the plateau. His victories were impressive. Cities that had fallen under foreign control returned to Iranian authority. Rival leaders within the country gradually accepted his dominance. By 1736, Nader Shah was formally crowned as ruler, establishing a new dynasty known as the Safavid Empire. But his ambitions did not stop at restoring the borders of Iran. Nader Shah believed that the security of the Iranian plateau depended on projecting power beyond its immediate frontiers. Throughout history, many Iranian rulers had understood this principle. If hostile forces gathered along the borders, the plateau itself could become vulnerable. So Nader Shah carried the war outward. He launched campaigns across Central Asia and the Caucasus, defeating several regional powers. His army moved quickly across difficult terrain, demonstrating a level of mobility that surprised many of his opponents. Then, in one of the most famous campaigns of the 18th century, he turned his attention toward the wealthy lands of the Indian subcontinent. At the time, northern India was ruled by the powerful Mughal Empire. For generations, the Mughal state had controlled vast territories and immense wealth. Its cities were among the richest in the world. Yet, by the time of Nader Shah's rise, the Mughal government had begun to weaken due to internal struggles and regional rebellions. Seeing an opportunity, Nader Shah led his army through Afghanistan and into the Mughal domains. In 1739, his forces confronted the Mughal army during the Battle of Karnal. Despite facing a larger army, Nader Shah used careful planning and tactical discipline to defeat the Mughal forces. The victory opened the road to the Mughal capital at Delhi. When Nader Shah entered the city, the event shocked much of the world. It demonstrated that Iran had once again become a powerful military force capable of projecting influence far beyond its borders. During this campaign, Nader Shah acquired enormous wealth, including famous treasures such as the Peacock Throne and the legendary diamond known as the Koh-i-Noor. These treasures symbolized the extraordinary scale of the campaign. But perhaps more important than the wealth was the message his victories sent. Iran, which had seemed vulnerable only a few decades earlier, had rapidly rebuilt its military strength and reasserted itself as a major regional power. Yet Nader Shah's reign also revealed another pattern often seen in Iranian history. Powerful rulers could achieve dramatic victories, but maintaining stability across such a vast and diverse land remained difficult. As the years passed, Nader Shah became increasingly suspicious of rivals and potential conspiracies. His rule grew harsher, and tensions within the empire increased. Eventually, in 1747, he was assassinated by members of his own inner circle. With his death, the Afsharid state quickly fragmented. Once again, the Iranian plateau entered a period of political uncertainty. And yet, even after the collapse of his empire, the deeper resilience of Iran remained visible. Foreign powers did not permanently dominate the plateau. Local dynasties emerged to govern different regions, and over time, a new ruling house gradually established authority. By the late 18th century, the Qajar dynasty rose to power. Under the Qajar rulers, Iran faced a very different kind of challenge. For the first time in its long history, the country would confront the growing influence of modern industrial empires from Europe. These powers possessed advanced technology, powerful navies, and global economic networks. They would not always attempt direct conquest. Instead, they would compete for influence through diplomacy, trade, and political pressure. This new era would test Iran in ways that earlier empires never had. The challenges of the 19th century would reveal that survival in the modern world required more than military strength alone. It required careful strategy, adaptation, and the ability to navigate the ambitions of powerful global rivals. In the next chapter of our journey, we will explore how Iran faced the expanding influence of the great European empires, and why, even during this era of global imperialism, the country remained difficult to fully control. By the late 18th century, the Iranian plateau had once again stabilized after years of conflict and political fragmentation. The powerful but short-lived empire of Nader Shah had collapsed after his assassination, and various regional leaders competed for authority. Gradually, one family emerged as the dominant force across much of the country. This ruling house became known as the Qajar dynasty. Under the Qajar rulers, Iran entered a new and very different era of history. For thousands of years, the main threats to the Iranian plateau had come from neighboring empires. Armies from Mesopotamia, Central Asia, or Anatolia had marched across the borders seeking conquest. But the 19th century introduced a new kind of challenge. Powerful industrial empires from Europe were expanding their influence across the world. These states possessed advanced technology, modern armies, powerful navies, and enormous economic resources. Their influence stretched across continents through colonies, trade networks, and diplomatic pressure. Two of these powers began competing intensely for influence in Iran. To the north stood the rapidly expanding Russian Empire. To the south and across the seas stood the global power of the British Empire. Both empires understood that Iran held enormous strategic value. The country sat at the crossroads between Europe, Central Asia, the Middle East, and the Indian subcontinent. Control or influence over Iran could shape trade routes, military strategy, and regional politics. For Britain in particular, Iran was important because it lay near the path to its most valuable colony, India. For Russia, expansion toward warmer southern waters and influence in the Caucasus region made Iran a key strategic objective. Yet neither empire attempted a full-scale conquest of Iran, similar to the colonial occupations seen in many other parts of the world. The reasons for this were complex. Part of the answer once again lay in geography. The Iranian plateau remained a difficult land to occupy. Mountains, deserts, and long distances complicated the movement of large modern armies, just as they had challenged ancient invaders. But geography was only part of the story. Another factor was political complexity. Iran was not an empty land waiting to be taken. It possessed a long history of centralized government, local leadership networks, and strong cultural identity. Attempting to rule the entire country directly would have required enormous military and administrative resources. Instead, the Russian and British empires often chose a different approach. They competed for influence rather than outright conquest. Historians later described this strategic rivalry as the Great Game. During the Great Game, diplomats, spies, merchants, and military advisors moved across Central Asia and the Middle East. Each empire attempted to strengthen its position while preventing the other from gaining dominance. Iran became one of the central arenas of this geopolitical contest. The Qajar rulers found themselves navigating an extremely delicate situation. They needed to protect their country's independence while dealing with powerful neighbors who possessed greater industrial and military capabilities. At times, the Qajar government struggled to manage these pressures. During the early 19th century, Iran fought several difficult wars against the expanding Russian Empire. These conflicts included the Russo-Persian War and the Russo-Persian War. In these wars, Russia's modernized military forces achieved several victories, and Iran was forced to sign treaties that transferred control of territories in the Caucasus region. Cities such as Tbilisi and large parts of what are now Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan passed under Russian authority. These territorial losses were painful for Iran. They demonstrated the growing power of industrial empires and the challenges faced by traditional states trying to adapt to the modern world. Yet even during this difficult period, something important remained true. Iran itself was never fully conquered. Despite military setbacks and diplomatic pressure, the core of the Iranian plateau remained independent. Part of this survival came from careful political balancing. The Qajar rulers sometimes played their powerful neighbors against each other, preventing either Russia or Britain from gaining complete control. Diplomatic agreements allowed each power limited influence without allowing total domination. Another factor was internal resilience. Iranian society continued to evolve during the 19th century. Intellectual movements began discussing reform, modernization, and the need for stronger institutions. Merchants, scholars, and political thinkers debated how Iran could adapt to the changing global order while preserving its independence. These discussions eventually contributed to one of the most important political events in modern Iranian history. In the early 20th century, growing dissatisfaction with royal authority and foreign influence led to a major political movement known as the Persian Constitutional Revolution. Beginning in 1905, protests and political organizing spread across major cities. Merchants, clerics, intellectuals, and ordinary citizens demanded limits on royal power and the creation of a representative government. Their efforts led to the establishment of a national parliament and a constitution. Although the movement faced many challenges and setbacks, it represented a major step toward political modernization. It also showed that Iranian society possessed strong internal dynamics capable of shaping its own future. However, the early 20th century brought even greater upheaval to the global system. In 1914, the world plunged into the enormous conflict known as World War I. Although Iran officially declared neutrality, its strategic location once again made it an important arena for foreign competition. Russian, British, and Ottoman forces all operated within Iranian territory at different moments during the war. The presence of foreign armies created instability and hardship for many communities across the country. Yet even during this chaotic period, Iran did not disappear as a political entity. When the war ended and the global order shifted once again, the country remained on the map as an independent state. But the challenges of the 20th century were far from over. The collapse of old empires, the rise of new ideologies, and the rapid spread of industrial technology would transform global politics in ways that earlier generations could barely imagine. Iran would soon experience dramatic internal change. A new dynasty would rise. The country's government, military, and economy would undergo sweeping reforms. And these transformations would place Iran directly in the center of global tensions during the modern era. In the next part of our journey, we will see how the 20th century reshaped Iran and why the country became one of the most strategically important nations in the modern Middle East. Because the reasons Iran is so difficult to defeat are not only buried in ancient history, they are also deeply connected to the dramatic events of the modern world. As the 20th century began, the world was changing faster than ever before. Industrial technology was transforming economies and militaries. New ideologies were reshaping politics. Old empires that had dominated the global stage for centuries were beginning to weaken or collapse. Iran stood directly in the path of these changes. The country had survived the intense rivalry of the Great Game between the Russian Empire and the British Empire, but the pressure of foreign influence remained strong. The early 20th century also brought internal instability. The political system created after the Persian constitutional revolution was still fragile. Different factions competed for influence, and the central government often struggled to maintain order across the vast territory of the Iranian plateau. At the same time, global conflict erupted. When World War I began in 1914, Iran once again found itself caught between larger powers. Although the country declared neutrality, its location made it strategically important for military operations. Russian, British, and Ottoman forces all moved through Iranian territory at different moments during the war. The presence of foreign armies created economic disruption and political tension. After the war ended, the global political map changed dramatically. Several long-standing empires disappeared almost overnight. Among them was the Russian Empire, which collapsed during the upheaval of the Russian Revolution. In the years that followed, Iran experienced growing calls for stronger leadership and national modernization. Many people believed the country needed a government capable of rebuilding stability and strengthening its independence in a rapidly changing world. Out of this environment emerged a military officer named Reza Shah. In 1921, he led a political movement that gradually consolidated power and reorganized the Iranian state. A few years later, he established a new ruling house known as the Pahlavi dynasty. Reza Shah believed that Iran needed rapid modernization in order to survive among the industrial powers of the 20th century. His government introduced major reforms. Infrastructure projects expanded roads and railways across the country. New schools and institutions were created. Efforts were made to build a stronger, centralized state capable of controlling distant provinces. The Iranian military was reorganized and modernized as well. For the first time in centuries, the government began building a national army equipped with modern weapons and training. These reforms were ambitious and sometimes controversial, but they reflected a long-standing lesson in Iranian history. Adaptation was essential for survival. Yet, once again, global events soon challenged Iran's stability. In 1939, another enormous conflict began, the worldwide struggle known as World War II. During this war, Iran's geographic position became critically important. The country lay along a major route connecting Allied supply lines between Europe and the Soviet Union. Ensuring the movement of military equipment and resources through the region became a strategic priority. In 1941, British and Soviet forces entered Iran and occupied key areas of the country. The occupation forced Reza Shah to abdicate the throne, and his son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, became the new ruler. For many Iranians, the presence of foreign troops once again raised difficult questions about national sovereignty. Yet, when the war ended, Iran did not remain permanently occupied. International pressure and diplomatic negotiations eventually led to the withdrawal of foreign forces. Once again, despite enormous geopolitical pressure, Iran remained an independent state. However, the political tensions of the 20th century were far from over. The discovery and growing importance of oil transformed the strategic value of the Middle East. Iran possessed some of the largest oil reserves in the region, making it an increasingly important player in global energy markets. This resource brought wealth, but also intense international interest. One of the most dramatic political moments in modern Iranian history occurred in 1951, when the country's prime minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, moved to nationalize Iran's oil industry. For many Iranians, nationalization represented a powerful assertion of economic independence. But the decision created major tensions with foreign governments and international corporations that had previously controlled much of the country's oil production. The crisis eventually led to a controversial political event known as the 1953 Iranian coup d'état. During this episode, Mossadegh was removed from power, and the authority of the Shah was strengthened. The event left a deep mark on Iranian political memory and influenced public attitudes toward foreign involvement in the country's affairs. During the following decades, Iran continued to modernize under the rule of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. Large development projects, economic reforms, and modernization programs attempted to transform the country into a major regional power. Yet these changes also created social and political tensions. Rapid modernization sometimes clashed with traditional institutions and cultural expectations. Economic inequality and political repression generated dissatisfaction among different segments of society. By the late 1970s, these tensions had grown into a powerful movement demanding major political change. What followed would become one of the most significant revolutions of the 20th century. A revolution that would reshape Iran's government, redefine its role in global politics, and introduce a new chapter in the long story of the country's resilience. In the next part of our journey, we will explore the dramatic events that led to the Iranian Revolution. And we will see how the transformation that followed would create a new political system determined to defend its independence in a world filled with powerful rivals. By the late 1970s, Iran stood at a crossroads in its long and complicated history. For decades, the country had been ruled by Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the last monarch of the Pahlavi dynasty. His government had pursued rapid modernization, industrial expansion, and close relationships with Western powers. Large cities expanded quickly, new highways and factories appeared. Oil revenues fueled ambitious development projects designed to transform Iran into one of the most powerful nations in the Middle East. From a distance, the country appeared to be moving toward prosperity and modernity. Yet beneath the surface, tensions were building. Rapid modernization created social disruption. Traditional communities sometimes felt disconnected from the pace of change. Economic inequality widened in certain areas. Political opposition groups criticized the lack of democratic freedoms. Religious leaders, intellectuals, students, and workers began expressing frustration with the direction of the government. Over time, these frustrations evolved into a widespread political movement. By 1978, demonstrations were spreading across major cities such as Tehran, Qom, and Isfahan. Protesters came from many different backgrounds. Some demanded political reform. Others called for deeper cultural and religious changes. Among the most influential figures associated with the opposition was the religious leader Ruhollah Khomeini. Khomeini had spent years in exile after criticizing the monarchy, but his ideas circulated widely among supporters inside Iran. His speeches and writings emphasized independence from foreign influence and the creation of a government guided by Islamic principles. As protests grew larger, the political situation became increasingly unstable. By early 1979, the crisis reached a turning point. Mohammad Reza Pahlavi left the country, and revolutionary forces gained control of the government. The dramatic transformation that followed became known as the Iranian Revolution. The revolution fundamentally changed Iran's political system. The monarchy that had ruled the country for decades was abolished. In its place emerged a new form of government known as the Islamic Republic. Under this system, political authority combined elements of republican institutions with religious leadership. A new constitution established elected bodies alongside the role of a supreme religious authority. This structure created a political system unlike most others in the world. For many Iranians, the revolution represented a powerful statement of independence. It was not only a domestic political transformation, but also a rejection of what many people perceived as excessive foreign influence in national affairs. However, the revolution also created intense tension with several neighboring states and global powers. International relationships shifted rapidly, and soon Iran faced one of the most devastating conflicts in its modern history. In 1980, the neighboring country of Iraq, led by its president Saddam Hussein, launched a large-scale invasion of Iranian territory. Saddam Hussein believed the revolutionary government in Iran was politically unstable and vulnerable. He also hoped to gain control of disputed border regions and expand Iraqi influence in the Persian Gulf. The invasion marked the beginning of the brutal conflict known as the Iran-Iraq War. The war quickly became one of the longest and most destructive conflicts of the late 20th century. At the beginning of the war, Iraqi forces advanced rapidly across parts of southwestern Iran. Several cities were threatened, and intense battles erupted along the frontier. Yet the invasion soon encountered fierce resistance. Iran mobilized large numbers of soldiers and volunteers to defend the country. Despite internal political changes and the shock of revolution, the population responded with determination. For many people, the war became a struggle for national survival. The conflict dragged on year after year. Trench warfare, missile attacks, and massive ground battles devastated towns and infrastructure on both sides of the border. Some historians have compared the scale and brutality of the fighting to the trench warfare of World War I. Chemical weapons were used during parts of the conflict, adding to the human tragedy. By the mid-1980s, the war had become a grinding stalemate. Neither side was able to achieve a decisive victory. Iran launched major offensives aimed at pushing Iraqi forces back, while Iraq attempted to halt Iranian advances and defend its territory. Meanwhile, the conflict gradually expanded beyond the battlefield. Oil tankers moving through the Persian Gulf became targets, creating tensions that involved international naval forces. One of the most strategically important waterways in the region is the narrow passage known as the Strait of Hormuz. A large portion of the world's oil supply passes through this route, making it a critical point in global energy markets. Any major disruption in this area has the potential to affect economies around the world. During the later stages of the Iran-Iraq War, tensions in the Persian Gulf increased as different powers sought to protect shipping routes and maintain stability. After 8 exhausting years of conflict, the war finally ended in 1988. The ceasefire left both countries deeply scarred. Hundreds of thousands of people had been killed or injured. Cities and infrastructure had been damaged. Entire generations had lived through the trauma of prolonged warfare. Yet one fact stood out clearly. Despite facing invasion, international pressure, and years of brutal fighting, Iran had not collapsed. The country had absorbed one of the longest conventional wars of the 20th century and remained intact. In many ways, the experience reinforced a sense of resilience within Iranian society. The war became part of the national memory, shaping how future leaders thought about defense and security. Military institutions were strengthened. strategic planning began focusing heavily on deterrence and asymmetric warfare. The lessons learned during those difficult years would influence Iran's military doctrine for decades to come. And these developments would play a major role in explaining why modern Iran remains such a complex challenge for any potential adversary. In the next part of our journey, we will explore how Iran reshaped its military strategy after the war, and how its geopolitical position continues to influence global politics in the 21st century. Because the story of why Iran is so difficult to defeat is not only written in ancient history, it is also written in the experiences of the modern world. When the guns finally fell silent in 1988, and the long years of the Iran-Iraq War came to an end, Iran faced a country deeply scarred by conflict. Cities near the border had been damaged, infrastructure needed rebuilding. Hundreds of thousands of families carried the memory of a brutal war that had lasted nearly a decade. But at the same time, the conflict had also reshaped the country's understanding of defense and survival. Iran had faced invasion from a well-armed neighbor. It had fought under economic pressure and political isolation. Yet, despite these challenges, the country had endured. For many leaders in Tehran, the lesson was clear. In the modern world, survival required a new kind of military strategy. Iran could not compete directly with the largest global powers in terms of conventional military strength. Countries such as the United States possessed vastly larger defense budgets, advanced technology, and global military networks. Instead of attempting to match these powers weapon for weapon, Iran began focusing on a different approach. This strategy is often described by analysts as asymmetric warfare. The basic idea is simple. Rather than confronting stronger opponents in traditional large-scale battles, a country develops methods that make conflict extremely costly and unpredictable for any attacker. Over time, Iran built a military doctrine designed around this principle. One of the key institutions involved in this strategy is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Often known simply as the Revolutionary Guard, this organization was formed after the revolution to defend the political system and support national security. During and after the Iran-Iraq War, the Revolutionary Guard expanded its role. It developed specialized units focused on missile technology, naval operations, intelligence, and unconventional warfare. At the same time, Iran invested heavily in missile development. Ballistic missile systems became an important part of the country's deterrence strategy. These weapons allow Iran to project force across long distances, even without maintaining a large modern air force. Military planners also focused on naval strategies suited to the geography of the Persian Gulf. The Gulf is a narrow body of water surrounded by several countries, and many of the world's most important oil shipping routes pass through it. At the northern entrance lies one of the most strategically important waterways on the planet, the Strait of Hormuz. Every day, a significant portion of the global energy supply travels through this narrow passage. Because the strait is so narrow, it creates a strategic environment where smaller naval forces can potentially influence much larger fleets. Iran's naval doctrine reflects this reality. Rather than building massive aircraft carriers or large fleets similar to those of major world powers, Iranian forces often focus on fast attack boats, coastal missile systems, and defensive mine warfare. These tactics are designed to create uncertainty for any potential adversary operating in the region. The objective is not necessarily to defeat a larger navy in open battle. Instead, it is to make any military operation near Iran's coast extremely complex and risky. Geography once again plays a crucial role. The coastline along the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman stretches for thousands of kilometers. Mountains rise not far from the coast in many places, providing natural locations for defensive infrastructure. Any hostile fleet operating in the region must navigate narrow waters, while remaining aware of potential threats from land, sea, and air. Beyond conventional military planning, Iran has also developed networks of regional relationships that influence its strategic position. Throughout the Middle East, various political and military groups maintain ties with Iran. These relationships create additional layers of complexity in regional conflicts. For potential adversaries, this means that military action against Iran might not remain confined to a single battlefield. Instead, tensions could spread across multiple regions at once. In modern strategic thinking, this concept is sometimes referred to as strategic depth. By maintaining influence beyond its borders, a country increases the number of factors an opponent must consider before initiating conflict. Another important element of Iran's modern strategy involves technological development. Over recent decades, the country has invested resources in research related to drones, cyber capabilities, and missile systems. Unmanned aerial vehicles have become particularly important in modern warfare. These systems allow reconnaissance and strike capabilities without placing pilots directly in danger. They can operate across difficult terrain and gather valuable intelligence. Cyber capabilities represent another modern frontier. In the 21st century, conflicts are no longer limited to physical battlefields. Information networks, infrastructure systems, and digital communications can also become targets during periods of tension. By developing these capabilities, Iran has attempted to expand the range of tools available for national defense. All of these strategies reflect a consistent theme in Iranian history: adaptation. From ancient cavalry tactics used by the Persian Empire to the gunpowder armies of the Safavid Empire, and from the campaigns of Nader Shah to the modern doctrines shaped after the Iran-Iraq War, Iranian military thinking has often focused on adjusting to the realities of each era. Another factor contributing to Iran's resilience is its population. The country is home to more than 80 million people spread across cities, mountains, plains, and desert regions. This large population provides both economic resources and potential manpower for defense. At the same time, Iranian society possesses a strong historical memory, shaped by centuries of invasion, conflict, and survival. Stories of past struggles remain part of cultural identity. Ancient epics such as the Shahnameh still remind readers of legendary heroes and battles from earlier ages. Historical experiences from modern conflicts also shape national consciousness. For many people in Iran, defending the country is not simply a political duty, it is connected to a deep sense of historical continuity. This combination of geography, strategy, population, and historical identity creates a complicated strategic environment. For any outside power considering military action against Iran, the challenge would involve far more than defeating a single army. It would involve navigating mountains and deserts, securing long supply lines, confronting asymmetric military tactics, and managing potential regional consequences. History shows that such situations rarely produce quick or simple outcomes. And this brings us close to the final chapter of our story. Because after thousands of years of invasions, empires, revolutions, and wars, the question remains the same. Why has Iran so often proven to be such a difficult country to defeat? In the final part of this journey, we will bring together the lessons of geography, history, culture, and strategy to understand why this ancient land continues to stand as one of the most resilient nations in the world. When we step back and look across the long arc of history, the story of Iran begins to reveal a remarkable pattern. Empires have risen and fallen around it, invaders have crossed its borders, global powers have competed for influence over its territory. And yet, the land that once formed the heart of the ancient Achaemenid Empire still exists today as a sovereign state known as Iran. To understand why this is the case, we must bring together all the forces that have shaped the country's history. The first, and perhaps most obvious factor, is geography. The Iranian plateau is not an easy land to conquer. Across its vast landscape lie towering mountain ranges such as the Zagros Mountains and the Alborz Mountains. Between these mountains stretch deserts like the Dasht-e-Kavir and the Dasht-e-Lut. These natural barriers divide the land into regions that are difficult for invading armies to control. Supply lines become long and fragile. Harsh climates exhaust soldiers unfamiliar with the terrain. Large forces moving through narrow mountain passes become vulnerable to ambush and disruption. For thousands of years, these geographic realities have shaped the outcome of wars fought on Iranian soil. But geography alone cannot explain everything. Many regions of the world possess mountains or deserts, yet they have still been conquered and permanently absorbed into foreign empires. Iran's resilience also comes from its deep historical identity. For more than 2,000 years, people living on the Iranian plateau have shared cultural traditions, languages, and stories that connect them to earlier generations. Literary works, such as the Shahnameh, preserve legends of ancient kings and heroes. These stories helped shape a collective memory that survived even when foreign dynasties ruled the land. Over time, this cultural continuity created something powerful. A sense that Iran was not merely a territory, it was a civilization. And civilizations tend to endure even when governments change. Another factor is the country's long tradition of statecraft. The rulers of ancient Persia developed complex administrative systems capable of governing vast territories. The empire created by Cyrus the Great and expanded by Darius the Great demonstrated that Iranian states could organize enormous populations and diverse regions under a single political structure. Later dynasties inherited and adapted these traditions, from the Parthian Empire to the Sasanian Empire, and from the Safavid Empire to the Qajar dynasty. Rulers continued to build administrative systems capable of maintaining order across a challenging landscape. Even when the country experienced invasion or political collapse, new governments eventually emerged from within Iranian society itself. This pattern appeared repeatedly throughout history. Foreign conquerors sometimes won battles, but they rarely erased the deeper structures of Iranian civilization. Over time, those structures absorbed or replaced the conquerors. We can see this dynamic clearly after the Arab conquest of Persia. Although the region adopted Islam and became part of a larger Islamic world, Persian culture, language, and intellectual traditions continued to flourish. Iranian scholars and administrators played major roles in shaping the wider Islamic civilization that followed. Centuries later, another wave of destruction arrived during the Mongol conquest of the Khwarezmian Empire, led by Genghis Khan. The Mongol invasions devastated cities and populations across the region. Yet, even after such catastrophic destruction, Iranian culture and political life gradually rebuilt themselves. New dynasties emerged, cities were restored, trade and scholarship returned. This ability to recover from extreme upheaval is one of the most striking features of Iranian history. The pattern continued into the modern era. Despite pressure from the Russian Empire and the British Empire during the Great Game, Iran preserved its independence. Despite revolution and internal turmoil during the Iranian Revolution, the country maintained its territorial integrity. Despite the devastating years of the Iran-Iraq War, Iran emerged with its political system still intact. Each era introduced new challenges. Each generation developed new strategies to confront them. Sometimes those strategies involved diplomacy. Sometimes they involved military resistance. Sometimes they required adaptation to global economic and technological change. But the underlying goal remained the same: survival. In the modern world, this survival is reinforced by a complex set of strategic realities. Iran occupies a central position in the Middle East, connecting regions that stretch from Central Asia to the Persian Gulf. Energy routes, trade corridors, and geopolitical rivalries all intersect near its borders. Any major military campaign against Iran would need to consider the challenges of geography, the scale of its population, the strength of its national identity, and the strategic importance of nearby waterways such as the Strait of Hormuz. History suggests that conflicts in such environments rarely end quickly. Instead, they tend to expand, drawing in additional actors and creating consequences far beyond the original battlefield. For this reason, many analysts believe that defeating Iran in a conventional sense would be extraordinarily difficult. Not impossible in theory, but enormously costly and unpredictable. And that brings us to the deeper truth hidden within this long historical journey. The strength of Iran has never come from a single factor. It is not only the mountains. It is not only the armies. It is not only the governments that have ruled the land. It is the combination of geography, culture, memory, and adaptation across thousands of years. Empires may collapse, borders may shift, governments may change, but civilizations with deep historical roots often endure, and Iran is one of the oldest civilizations still standing in the modern world. From the royal courts of Cyrus the Great to the crowded streets of modern Tehran, more than 2.5 millennia of history have shaped the identity of this land. That long memory continues to influence how the country sees itself and how it responds to the challenges of the present, which is why, after centuries of conflict and transformation, the story of Iran remains one of resilience. A reminder that in history, survival is often the greatest victory of all. If you made it to the end of this journey, you have just traveled through more than 2,000 years of history. From the rise of ancient Persian kings to the mountains and deserts that shaped countless wars. From empires that shook the world to modern geopolitical struggles that still influence our planet today. The story of Iran is not simply a story about one country. It is a story about how geography, culture, memory, and survival can shape a civilization for thousands of years. A story about why some nations disappear from history while others endure through every storm. And perhaps that is the most fascinating lesson hidden inside this history. Power alone does not guarantee survival. Empires with the largest armies have vanished. Kingdoms with enormous wealth have collapsed into dust. Yet some civilizations, built on deep roots and powerful identity, continue to stand long after their rivals have faded away. Iran is one of those civilizations, and this is exactly the kind of hidden history we explore here on Forbidden Lore. If you enjoy deep historical mysteries, forgotten civilizations, ancient empires, and the untold stories that shaped our world, make sure you subscribe to Forbidden Lore and turn on notifications so you never miss the next journey into the past. Your support helps this channel uncover more stories that most history books barely mention. If you found this story fascinating, leave a like on the video. It tells the algorithm that you want more history like this, and it helps more curious minds discover the channel. And tell me in the comments what historical mystery we should explore next. Because the past is filled with secrets. And here on Forbidden Lore, we uncover them one story at a time.